One of the mistakes we are making, potentially, is the cities that are going back into lockdowns. People don't want it, right? There's a lot of these cities where people protest. There's a video out this weekend where a health department official and 2 sheriffs show up to basically shut down a restaurant. They kind of threw them out. They said, unless you have a warrant, get out. We're working. We got people to pay. We got to make money, right? And I think there's a lot of that sentiment now coming around that small business owners just want to get back to work, and they'll do whatever, right? They're doing the social distancing, they're doing the reduced seating, they're doing all those type of things. They're taking all the precautions, but they want to get back to work, and that's good for the economy. And getting back to work is important, right? We discussed this about 2 weeks ago on the website. We wrote an article talking about the economic cycle. Stimulus, government support is not beneficial long-term, because all it does is drag forward future consumption. But then if there's no stimulus in the future, right, and people are not working, then there's nothing there, right? So you've got to do more stimulus. You get people to work, they have to produce something. So the economic cycle is fairly simple. I go to work, I do something productive, I get paid for it. When I get paid for it, then I go out and spend the money to buy things I want or need. If a lot of people are working and producing, then they go out and consume stuff. That creates demand within the economy, which requires companies to hire more people to meet that demand. They produce and earn a paycheck, then they go consume something, and then that increases demand even more, so more people have to be hired and put to work, and so forth and so on. And that's the golden economic cycle, right? That's what creates strong rates of economic growth. When you have a large chunk of the population living on government welfare or socialism, there's no production. People consume very short term, right? So you give me some money, I go out and I buy my groceries, but then it's over, and I've got to come back and provide more stimulus to buy more groceries, so forth and so on, right? So you have a reduction in economic activity in socialistically driven societies. A lot of the speculative investments they're making have huge downside risk because there's nobody willing to buy that stock until it drops a lot.
Right. And I think a lot of people say it doesn't matter. The Fed has my back. And maybe they're right. Mm-hmm. But the Fed, right now at least, does not buy stocks.
Right.
Right? The Fed is the rah-rah cheerleader that gets everyone playing hard and buying and all that. But at the end of the day, the Fed may not be there. Right? At some point, the Fed will be there, and they will buy stocks, and they will prop this up. They will prop it up. But the Fed does not buy stocks, and they buy bonds, but there are only so many bonds to buy because they're taking all those bonds.
Right. Well,
right?
Look, this is the same problem that Japan has run into. It's a great idea that the Fed will buy stocks, but eventually at some point, everybody just starts selling all their stocks to the Fed. And the problem becomes is that you begin to distort markets, because when the Fed owns 80% of the stock market, like Japan owns 80% of the ETF market, you don't really have a market anymore.
Right.
And so then this becomes a lot more difficult and then what happens? I mean, eventually the Fed has got to sell to somebody. And if they want to reduce the amount of equities on their book, right, they've got to sell to somebody. If nobody's willing to stand there and buy from the Fed, well, if you're selling and you're the sole proper upper of the market and you're wanting to sell, I'm not buying, right?
Right.
So there's and it may be years before you get there, but there seems to be a huge problem with this whole theory.
Right. One of the main principles of capitalism is free markets. And we are erasing a huge part of capitalism. And with that, the benefits of capitalism go away.
2020 has been a crazy year. We've seen stuff happen in 2020 that we would never think about. We're not just talking about the government releasing information on UFOs. That was always a big conspiracy theory, and now the government's releasing information on that. So, but we've seen a lot of things that typically we said would never happen in the U.S. We would never see universal basic income. And we saw that this year. Back in March, when we did direct checks to households and we did extended unemployment benefits, that's universal basic income. We gave everybody government taxpayer-funded living benefits. Never thought that we would see that in the U.S., but yet here we are. Never thought we would see travel papers. Whenever you see, kind of World War II movies or anything like this, and you see movies about Germany back then, it was like, let me see your travel papers, right? You couldn't cross borders without having papers. You couldn't travel. You couldn't be outside your house. You couldn't do things unless you had authorization from the government to do so. And we're seeing that again today as we get more concerned about COVID and traveling, and because of this pandemic, and we're getting more and more applications put in about tracking and where we go and what we do and who we're with. And that's something else that, for Americans who believe in freedom, we thought we would never see. And the tracking, right? We've talked about, tracing now is important, right? We've got to be able to, if you go and have some contact with somebody who's got COVID, we've got to be able to trace you, right? So we've had companies come out with, contact tracing applications. So you put that on your phone, and then you can, then somebody can trace wherever you've been. And the mandatory GPS tracking of humans is something that in 2020, we saw it and we accepted it. We said, hey, okay. Right? We got to do this, right? We got to fight the pandemic so you can track me everywhere I go. Cashless societies, moving more and more away from using cash, doing more about doing everything on credit and digital. Something we never thought would happen in the U.S. More microchips being embedded in everything that we do, mandatory vaccines being discussed. These are all things that we never thought we would see in the U.S., but we saw them all at once in 2020. So maybe conspiracy theories aren't so much of a conspiracy after all. There's a belief that the United States can't currently have negative yields, but we actually can. It's just a function of people buying bonds to the point that they run the price of the bond up until it has a negative yield to maturity on it. And so we're not that far away from actually falling into negative yields here as well.
First of all, we do have negative yields.
On an inflation-adjusted basis, yes.
Right. Because at the end of the day, we're all subject to inflation. So if inflation's running 2% and the bond yields 1%, guess what? You're losing 1% a year.
Correct.
Just like if your salary, if you got a 1% raise in a 2% inflation environment, you're actually making less money this year than last year. Right? So we do have negative real rates.
Yeah, but I live nominal. If I get a 1% raise, I'm happy.
Right. Even though it costs you 2% to do everything.
Exactly. But it doesn't matter. Quit taking away my happy face.